May I have your attention, please? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is son of Yisrayl, future priest Kiva Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It's now time to start finding your seats for Sabbath services.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is son of Yisrayl, Yahweh Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It is a privilege and an honor to present to you the sons and daughters of Yisrayl now entering the sanctuary. I'd now like to turn it over to our first speaker, son of Yisrayl, Barzillai Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. My title today is Respected Teacher So You Can Teach. The definition of respect from Webster's Illustrated Contemporary Dictionary is a high regard for and appreciation for worth, esteem, the condition of being honored or respected. In the Peaceful Solution Respect Unit on page 3, it says, it means to recognize the value of people and things and to treat them with consideration, care, and concern. Why should we respect our teachers? Because we learn Yahweh's laws from our teachers and many other things. Positive law number 172 says, listen to and obey Yahweh's anointed servants, the overseer of the House of Yahweh. If you would turn over to Deuteronomy 18:15-19, Deuteronomy 18:15-19, found on page 162, it says, Yahweh your Father will raise up for you a prophet like me from the midst of your own brothers. He you must listen to. And back then, the prophet was Moshe. But in these last days, our prophet and our teacher is Yahweh Hawkins. Praise Yahweh. Yahweh your Father will raise up a prophet like me from the midst of your own brothers. He you must listen to. For this is what you asked of Yahweh at Horeb on the day you gathered together, saying, let us not hear the voice of Yahweh, our Father, nor see this great fire anymore, or we will die. Then Yahweh said to me, what they have spoken is the truth. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I command him. Whoever will not listen to my words which he speaks in my name, I will judge him for it. In the fourth book of Yisrayl, chapter 9, verse 10, page 83, it says, why should you love a teacher? The main reason you love him is that he shows you the way to eternal life. That is the same reason you reject a false teacher. And also in the fourth book of Yisrayl, verse 13, page 84, it says, this is the reason you have to do this. And you have to love the teachers Yahweh has sent to you, no matter who he or she is. Remember, I brought out last time that you are to show the deepest reverence for your father and your mother. This same wording is used when referring to your parents as it is when referring to Yahweh Himself. So we see that our teachers in the House of Yahweh teach us the 613 laws, which lead to eternal life. We are to love and show the deepest reverence and respect for our teachers. This starts in the classroom this starts at home and ripples out in the classroom. So as you can see in this picture right here, that teacher is not being respected. And also, as you can see in this picture, the teacher is not being respected, and because the class is all rowdy and taking pictures and knocking over chairs, that affects the students, takes away their attention for learning from the class, and it also is disrespectful to the teacher. In the 13th book of Yisrayl, part 1, chapter 20, verse 44, it says, "Now if you can think of Yeshua and how he was this very thing, he lived it, he taught it, he lived it, and that's what you have come to do right now. You may burn in hell for what you're setting forth teaching, unless you come into unity with me and start teaching exactly what I teach as the great Kahan Shaul Hawkins just brought out, into unity. That's very important. You can't rebel. You can't rebel against Yahweh, Yahweh's house. You become a servant of Satan. You become a teacher of Satan. You become Satan's teacher. That's what Yahweh calls you. If you don't teach the laws in unity with me, you become a servant of Satan, and Satan doesn't give eternal life. She wants you destroyed, and that's her whole purpose today. So as you can see there, Pastor Yisrayl Hawkins is telling us to come into unity and teach the laws of Yahweh with him. And Pastor Yisrayl Hawkins in these last days is our teacher. Praise Yahweh. In conclusion, let us show respect to our teachers so that one day we'll qualify to be teachers.
Okay, and now I'd like to introduce the great Deacon Yaakov.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Today my title is on the results of gift giving. Now first, if you turn to Proverbs 15, that's found on page 506, Proverbs 15, and we'll look at verse 27. Now it says, "He who is greedy for gain brings trouble on his own house, but he who hates bribes will live." Now, bribes, those are gifts. He who hates gifts will live. Now, the word gift from one of the online dictionaries It means something that is given willingly or something obtained easily or cheaply. For example, a present. It also says the natural ability to do something. The word give means to hand over as a present and to allow to have, to provide or to supply, to cause people to have and to hand over. That's the word gift and give from the dictionary. So it's something that is given or something easily obtained. And it gives an example as a present. Now, in the 10th book of Yisrayl, if you see that there, that's the 10th book of Yisrayl, part 2, chapter 10, verse 20. It says, she wants things like Christmas and Halloween. And Halloween has now become the number one. It's overtaken Easter even, because the gifts, the gift giving, the trick-or-treating, they go out prowling and demanding it. Anyway, stay away from gifts. The only gifts we want are the gifts that Yahweh has to offer. Praise Yahweh. And we know those gifts Yahweh offers are like the prophetic word or the newsletter, the free knowledge that comes out to us to increase us spiritually. Praise Yahweh. Now, you see there, they go out prowling and demanding it. And here's some things. If you don't give them their gifts that they want, here's what they do. Can everyone see that? That's a picture of one of the Halloween nights. That's toilet paper all through the trees, all on the person's car, all through the parking lot. That's what they do to your house. Here's another one. Toilet paper strung all through the trees. That's what occurs when you don't give them their gift that they want. Now I have some articles here I'd like to read you. The first one, it's from mirror.com, www.mirror.com. It says, when trick-or-treating goes wrong, 9 times the Halloween night tradition backfired badly. Now you see on the picture there, that's one of their Halloween nights, the hollowed out pumpkin. And the person there that's all dressed up looking like a devil or something. It says on Saturday, millions of kids were set to hit the streets with their goodie bags to go trick-or-treating. Most will come back. You notice the first word there. Most will come back. Not all of them are going to come back. With a mountain of sweets big enough to last all year. But in some cases, the annual Halloween tradition can go badly wrong. Now, the fourth thing they give here, trick-or-treater mauled by a dog. Now, this is what occurred last Halloween. It says one child was savagely attacked and attacked by an out-of-control dog in Coventry, Warwickshire. It says the trick-or-treater was injured in the incident around 7 p.m. last Halloween. Police were called and the matter was eventually settled by a community resolution. Now, but you still see there, they got mauled by a dog. This is Halloween. This is what Satan's way brings. Also, child shot while knocking on doors with friends. It says an 8-year-old boy was shot while trick-or-treating with friends last year after a hooded gunman opened fire on a group of children. It says the man reportedly walked up to the kids who were in front of a home in Memphis, Tennessee, and began firing. Also, number 8, you see there it says brick or treat. Now you see that's one of their Halloween costume things. It says brick or treat. It says a person took the trick option of the Halloween tradition several steps too far. A homeowner in East Lindsey, Lincolnshire, received a shock when a brick wrapped in a carrier bag was hurled through their window on Halloween 2013. The brick had a note with a piece of paper attached saying, "Trick or treat," and then it said no suspect was identified. But you still see that this is what the ways of the world bring. All these deaths taking place from their Halloween day. Just this one Halloween, it brought a lot of deaths. Now, here's another article. It says 3 dead, 4 hurt when a car hits trick-or-treaters in New York City. It says here, an out of control car plowed into a group of trick-or-treaters on Saturday evening, killing 3 people, including a 10-year-old girl and her grandfather, and injuring 3 others, police said. The driver was also injured. A 52-year-old man behind the wheel of a black Dodge Charger went careering into a group of pedestrians on a sidewalk and then smashed through a fence in front of the home. Police said the car was left teetering on a brick wall. A child's shoe and remnants of mangled stroller lay on the sidewalk just feet away. It says moments before the car jumped the sidewalk, the driver had crossed a double yellow line in the road after bumping into the back of a Toyota Camry, police said. It says 65-year-old Luis Perez suffered severe head trauma and died at the scene. Police said his granddaughter, 10-year-old Nyana Aquil, and 24-year-old Christine Lika were taken to a hospital where they were pronounced dead. Authorities said a 3-year-old girl was critically injured, a 20-year-old woman and a 9-year-old girl and the driver of the car also were taken to the hospital with injuries not believed to be life-threatening. So you see there, this is what the ways of the world brings. 3 dead and 4 hurt. Now, House of Yahweh, do we want this way? No, we don't. We don't go trick-or-treating on Halloween night just to get killed. Now, you see here, this is the 10th book of Yisrayl, part 2, chapter 8, verse 89. It says, the reason we don't give gifts in the house of Yahweh is because Yahweh said, gifts turns the head. They don't see this evil that the man wanted from giving this gift. So it turned the head. Well, I gave you a favor. Oh, I know. Mark this much off your list. You remember the unfaithful servant that Yeshua spoke of? It started with the giving of a damned gift. Now, let's turn to Luke. Luke 16. Luke 16, that's found on page 801. Luke 16, and we'll start at verse 1. Now this is talking about the unfaithful servant. It says, then he also said to his disciples, this is Yeshua speaking, it says, there was a certain rich man who had a manager, a steward, and he heard accusations that this man was wasting his possessions. So he summoned him and said to him, why is it that I hear this about you? Give a complete accounting of your management, for you can no longer have that position. So he was going to take him off the job. Now it said, then the manager said within himself, what will I do? My ruler is taking that position from me. I am unable to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. Now I know what I will do, that when my position is gone, I will have friends who will welcome me in their houses. Now the only reason he would have friends that would already welcome him is because he already gave them a gift. He gave them a gift, and so now they're giving something in return back to him. It says, so he summoned every one of his rulers, debtors, and said to the first, how much do you owe my ruler? He said, 100 baths of oil. So he said, take back your acknowledgement of debt, and sit down quietly and write it for 50. Then he said to another, how much do you owe? And he said, 100 ephahs of wheat. So he said to him, take back your acknowledgement of debt, and write it for 80. Then the ruler commended the dishonest manager for having looked to his own interest. It says, for the children of this world are wiser in dealing with their generation than the children of the light. But I say to you, remember your brothers willingly through your diligent giving of your tithes and offerings from the riches of this world, so that when the end comes, you will be received into Yahweh Shema. So you see that if you give your tithes and offerings, not give your gifts to another person, it says if you give your tithes and offerings, then you will be received into Yahweh Shema. Then it says, he who is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he who is unjust in the least is also unjust in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two rulers, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both Yahweh and Mammon. You cannot sit in the house of Yahweh that one Sabbath and then go out that night trick-or-treating. You have to either be with Yahweh or be with the world. And I advise you to be with Yahweh. Now, praise Yahweh. It says, back from the 10th book of Yisrayl, back to the 10th book of Yisrayl, it says, don't give gifts in the house of Yahweh. If you give a gift, give it to Yahweh's house. Donate it to Yahweh's house. Don't give it to a person. Yahweh says, pick priests who hate gifts. Don't be taking gifts. Don't be accepting gifts from anybody. Beware. Beware of those giving gifts. Why would he tell you this? To warn you that it turns the head. It causes unjust judgments. Now, even the world knows this. In a book, Influence and the Psychology of Persuasion, also, you can look it up at www.influenceatwork.com. On page 17, it says, a few years ago, this is chapter 2, reciprocation, and it's pretty much, that word means gift giving, pretty much. It says, a few years ago, a university professor tried a little experiment. He sent Christmas cards to a sample of perfect strangers. So there you see he's giving a gift. It says, although he expected some reaction, the response he received was amazing. Holiday cards addressed to him came pouring back from the people who had never met or heard of him. It says, the rule says, a little further down, it talks about gift giving. It says, the rule says that we should try to repay in kind what another person has provided for us. It says, if a woman does us a favor, we should do her one in return. If a man sends us a birthday present, we should remember his birthday as a gift of our own. So you see there, that's the rule of gift giving. And that's what pastor's talking about here. If you give something to someone, they think that in turn they should give something back to you. Now in closing, in the 12th book of Yisrayl, part 1, chapter 21, verse 35, pastor says, hate gifts. Don't take gifts. Why do you need a gift? There are other ways of getting things besides taking a gift. A gift sets you up for another scratch my back. You would not rightly turn someone down if they just set an apple tree or something in your front yard as a gift, could you? Well, you owe that person. Don't you think if you've done something free for them, you took it on your own? Do you see what you're doing when you take your gifts? They could be thrown behind you in the lake of fire with you. So you see there, don't take gifts and don't give gifts. All right, so in closing, remember Pastor's words. Don't take gifts. And if you all please stand, I'll turn it over to the next speaker, the great Deacon David Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Wow, what a great day. And what a great honor it is to be here and able to speak with you here in the House of Yahweh on this beautiful Sabbath. Today we're going to talk a little bit about no reward for the wicked. No reward for those who leave. That is the actual title. No reward for those who leave. Now, at first thought, this sounds kind of simple, right? If they're not here, obviously they're not going to receive the reward, wouldn't you say? But let's take a little deeper look at it and think about this question. Do we leave the house of Yahweh in bodily form, or can we leave the house of Yahweh by our words? These words, they're extremely important. Be turning to Matthew 12:37 on page 739 if you would. While we're doing that, I'd like to share something with you. Recently, the boys' school had the opportunity to witness a Supreme Court proceeding. It was very interesting, and some of the things that they took away from it is we noticed that you had to get your presentation, or your argument they call it, you had to put it forth in a very short period of time. We also noticed that the lawyers, as they were standing there, they were hammered with questions from the justices. They would be talking about something, and one of the justices would interrupt and just fire off a question. And that lawyer had to be on their toes with the proper words coming from their mouth. If those words that came from their mouth were not what the justices were looking for, it's unaccepted. It's unacceptable. They will not find on their side, on their case. So keep that in mind. Everybody knows that these words make a huge difference in our lives. Okay, so in Matthew 12:37, if you've got it there on page 739, I guess I ought to get it too. Matthew 12:37. It says, "For by your words you will be justified, or by your words you will be condemned." By your words you'll be justified, or by your words you will be condemned. So look over at the side note there where it says by your words, it says G2. It says their wicked words shall be sufficient proof to condemn their unrighteousness. So I looked up that word wicked in the American Heritage Dictionary, and it means evil or immoral. That made me think immediately of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program being moral rules to live by, to guide our lives by. But this evil or immoral is from Old English Wicca. If you remember, we've spoken about the Wicca, the Wiccans, these sorcerers. It also says sea witch. It's also from the same root word, which means to twist, as in a wick, like in a candle wick, or twisting words. So this witchcraft is one particularly skilled. A witch is particularly skilled or competent at one's craft. And that witchcraft is a magical or irresistible influence or attraction. So your words can be an irresistible influence to others, an attraction that pulls them into whatever it is you're talking about. These wicked words. Let's look again at verse 37. So verse 37, by your words you will be justified, or by your words you will be condemned. Okay? All right. Some say I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like the requirements of the house of Yahweh. It's just too much, you know? I want to have some fun before I die. They're being judged by their words. I mean, think about it. How silly is that? I want to have some fun before I die? Well, you know, Satan hears your words. Satan hears your words just like Yahweh hears your words. You're talking to Satan when you do this. Or what about this one? Well, you know, if I decide to stay here, if I decide to, I'm thinking about it a little bit, you know. I mean, how strong is that? At that time, you know what? At that time, you are cut off from Yahweh. When you say something like that, when you say, I don't like the requirements of the house of Yahweh, I want to have some fun before I die, I'm thinking about staying here. Well, what if I stay here? What if I don't? If I decide to, I might. Well, at that time, you're cut off from the house of Yahweh, and you are talking to Satan. You're also spreading these words, these influential words. The people around you, when these words come out of your mouth, you're spreading it. Spreading it. And it's like a disease which carries on. You're actually talking to the one that you obey also. Remember Romans 6:16. Romans 6:16. Let's turn there real quick. Romans 6:16 on page 878. Do you not know that to whom you yield yourselves as servants to obey, his servants you are whom you obey? Whether of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness. So when you're talking to the one that you obey by using these wicked words and spreading them out to the entire congregation or whoever occurs to be around you at that time, you're also being fearful. You're fearful that you're missing out on something. Something you feel like, oh, maybe I should have done this, or maybe I should have done that. Maybe you're watching some entertainment or something, and all of a sudden you feel like you're missing out on some fun. Well, look at Revelation 21:8 on page 985. Let's go there real quick. Revelation 21:8. Page 985. But the fearful and the unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers. Now remember that unbelieving, it reminds me of Luke 24:25. O fools and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. The unbelieving. Sorcerers and worshippers of gods, Elohim, and all liars will have their part in the lake of fire, which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. So you've already gone in your heart at this time. You're turning back to Egypt, actually. In fact, I have something from Israel Says. I got it right here. Just a moment. This is great, being able to look up things in Israel Hawkins Says. I mean, you should all try it. It really is beneficial. And for those of you watching out there in TV land, you should try it too. It's great. You can find any topic, any subject that you're looking for, you can find the answer. And it's the answer from Scriptures. So the first book of Israel, chapter 31 and verse 47 says, neither filthiness nor foolish talking. He says this comes from the heart. Whatever proceeds from the mouth comes forth from the heart. I know a man, pastor says, I know a man who is on the way to hell right now. I've warned several people. I see them go, and soon they're gone from the house and back to breaking even the little laws of Yahweh that they knew from the beginning. Well, like the Sabbath. I know things they have said, and I have warned them that they're being judged from this, and they need to confess and repent of it, or it's going to stay there between them and Yahweh, and they will never make it. The words, remember the words. That is how serious your words are. And that's what he's talking about. That's what he's talking about here with this foolish talking. It could be anything. If you go back into the law, it means condemning the priest, what he said, or a word against the worker or a mediator, a word against the work. You know, this is drudgery, something like that. I mean, it comes from the heart. Let's go back to Matithia, page 739, Matithia 12, and let's look at verse 34. Page 739. Brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak righteous things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth truly speaks. A righteous man from the righteous treasure of the heart brings forth righteous things. But an evil man from the evil treasure brings forth evil things. And I say to you that every word against the work that men will speak, they will give account for in the day of sentencing. For by your words, remember this, by your words you will be justified, or by your words you will be condemned. And this starts with this murmuring. It starts with complaining. You know, like the Korites. In fact, turn to Numbers, if you will. Turn to Numbers 16:13. That's on page 125. Give you a moment to get there. It starts with the murmuring and complaining, the not liking something someone said to you, or maybe not figuring you got enough personal time to yourself, or I do this every day. I'm sick and tired of this, Or when someone tells you something, someone in authority says something, and they walk by and you're under your breath, I can't believe that. That's how it starts, with this type stuff. And in Numbers 16:13 it says, this is when they were rising up against Moshe, and they're saying, isn't it enough? They're complaining, isn't it enough that you've brought us out of the land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in this wilderness? And now you also want to keep acting like a prince over us? Moreover, you've not taken us into a land flowing with milk and honey, and you've not given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. You're deceiving everyone. No, we will not come. And if you look at the side note over there, G3, it says, thus they spoke contemptuously, preferring Egypt to the promised land. Actually, preferring Egypt. Well, this grumbling, I've got something for you here again. On the out of the 7th book of Israel. Find it here. Okay, out of the 7th book of Israel, part 2, chapter 4, verse 92, it says, do not grumble against each other, brothers, or you will be condemned. Is that plain enough for you? Yahweh will not allow it. I call heaven and earth to witness against you. I'm not going to allow this in my kingdom. I'm not going to allow these people to have power unless they can overcome this. Get it? Overcome this. You can rest assured, all you beings in the universe, I'm not going to give it to those except those who overcome. Here's another one. It's from the 4th book of Israel, the Reverence of Yahweh, number 9, verse 74. And it says, these things don't bring joy, but Yahweh's laws bring joy when they are kept correctly. Do you know what? They bring joy to your neighbor next to you also. When they're not kept, you see frustration, bitterness, anger, and hatred. You see griping, you see complaining. And if we were all perfect, we wouldn't do this. We wouldn't gripe and complain, would we? All right, well, let me share this with you. So yesterday I was putting this together and all. And I thought to myself, today's 11:13. I just thought, I'll look in Strong's and see what that is, And so I looked in Strong's, and in the Strong's Greek, this is hilarious. It's not a coincidence either. In Strong's Greek, the word 1113 means a murmurer, a grumbler. And it's from the word 1111, which actually means to mutter, to murmur. Maybe you've heard someone do this before. Maybe you've done it yourself. We need to guard against that. The short definition is whisper, murmur, or grumble. Whisper, murmur, grumble, generally of smoldering discontent. Smoldering, it's just kind of in there burning away a little bit, And if you add fuel to that little smoldering, that little fire, it's going to grow and grow and grow. So it means to murmur or mutter, grumble with muffled undertones. Remember the muffled undertones? The supervisor walks by and you're like, I'm not going to do that, man. That guy's lost his mind. Yeah. Murmur, grumble, to show smoldering discontent, droning on in a low, constant murmur. Just constantly murmuring. Well, so complaining about the day-to-day grind, the drudgery and all, but, it was the same then as it is now. And it's the same out in the world, except out in the world, that drudgery is big time. I mean big time. You know, in fact, people, they're having a hard time paying their bills. They can't pay their taxes. They can't feed their animals. You know, in fact, people are calling all the time. Daily they call and want to know if the House of Yahweh will take their animals. They don't want to put them in an animal shelter, but they can't feed them. They don't want to just kill them. But they know the House of Yahweh will take care of their animals. In fact, all the donkeys have been given to us. And this is like all the time. They're always calling. You got to remember that the world is not a pleasant place. I mean, I know it looks desirable, but it's not a pleasant place at all. In fact, shortly you'll be hearing some you'll be hearing some news articles, but some of the headlines in the latest prophetic word are underreported conflicts. They don't report all the conflicts that are going on in the world right now. 90% of all deaths in war are civilians. That's one of the headlines. A cop is killed every 58 hours. These are the articles that are in here. Nobody knows how many Americans the police kill each year. These are the headlines, pulling people in to read these. Addressing suicide among seemingly successful college students. So suicide's a big thing. Bullying and suicide, a guide released today by No Bullying. You know, and they're trying to do something about all this, but they don't know what to do. There's an article called Healing the Invisible Wound, talking about the suicides in the military. There's another one that says, son, men, don't get raped. It turns out that in the military, there are more men than women that get raped, nearly 14,000 in 2012. So, you know, this is not, I'm going to tell you, the world is not the thing that we need to be looking forward to. Satan makes it look really great, right? I mean, really great. You got anything and everything. You can look at the phone. You can look at the internet screen, billboards, articles, everything. She makes it look really, really great. But this is the deception of the gods. In fact, if you turn to page 2 in Genesis, I think everyone can find that one. Genesis 3:6. I found it, so I know you can. Genesis 3:6. It says, so when the woman saw that the tree was desirable for food and that it was pleasant to the eyes and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate also. But you got to remember first Yachanan. Go over to page 965, please. Page 965. I remember in first Yachanan, in verse 7 through 10, it says, little children, let no man deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. And he who commits or practices sin is of the devil. For the devil has sinned from the beginning, and for this purpose the Son of Yahweh was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. Now, whoever is begotten of Yahweh does not practice, does not commit sin, for his seed remains in him. And it is possible for him not to sin because he has been begotten of Yahweh. All right? And then an important thing for us to remember, if you turn over to Revelations 21 on page 984. Revelations 21 on page 984, just a few pages over. He who overcomes will inherit all things. And I will be his father, and he will be my son. Now, is that just overcoming the actions? Or is it overcoming words too? You know, words are important in our communication. Yes, the body language and the tone of voice and everything is important on face-to-face communication when you're dealing with somebody. But we are being judged by our words. So even if you don't leave out the gate, your actions, you're still being judged by your words. You know, it's the same thing that went on with Cain. If you turn over to Genesis 4:6, back to page 3. Genesis 4:6 on page 3. It says, so Yahweh said to Cain, why are you angry? Why are you downcast? If you do righteousness, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do righteousness, sin is crouching at your door. Now listen, the desire to sin is with you, but you must overcome it. Yahweh gave us the carnal mind. It's there so we can do what? Overcome it. To overcome the words that come out of our mouth from the treasure in our heart. So there was a feud going on, and this feud went on for many years with Cain and Abel. Cain argued with Abel. And Cain didn't like the requirements of the house of Yahweh. You know, Cain wanted to go out and have some fun before he died. And so we don't want to be like Cain. In 1 Yochanan 3:12, it actually says, not as Cain, who was of that wicked one. Remember, you're a servant to whom you obey. Remember the wicked words, the grumbling and everything, and murdered his brother. And why did he murder his brother? Because his works were evil and his brothers were righteous. So he wanted to have some fun. He didn't like the requirements in the house of Yahweh. It's just too much to deal with, you know. But remember Romans 6:16, you're a servant to whom you obey. And the problem is that Cain never got his mind on the work. Never got his mind on the work. We got to get our mind on the work that we have to do. And we can't be like Cain. And we don't want to be like Frank, that singer, I can't think of it right now. Francis, I think, was his first name. And he did it his way. And then many others after him did it their way too. And they sang about it and all. But interestingly enough, there's a Francis out there now that's doing it his way also. But we can't be like that. We have to remember our first love. And in the 9th book of Israel, part 1, well, this Israel Says program, it's something else, I'll tell you what. In the 9th book of Israel, part 1, chapter 6, verse 43, he said, if you remember, our high priest Yeshua said in Revelation, you have left your first love. Well, when you leave your first love, you leave the laws and the prophecies that are brought forth from Galilee. From Abel. From Abelin they're brought forth. So you leave them and start breaking the laws. You turn back to sin. Remember, the Korites, they preferred Egypt. They wanted to turn back. Well, of course, goes on to say, it's talking about the word August and all. But anyway, that's the thing, is your first love. Don't turn back to sin. Now this work that we're doing, let me just try to get this in here real quick. That first love, the work. And this is out of the 4th book of Israel, Children's Edition. But remember, the 3 out of 4 that fall away, they fall because they're not involved in his work. Yeshua said it is only the ones who are involved in his work, the work of Yahweh, who actually make it, survive, and endure until the end. It's only the 1 out of 4. And then in the 4th book, it also says, in verse 83, this is the way that the house of Yahweh is going to have to stay. First, we're going to have to come to that perfect joy. Remember the joy. Then we have to come to that perfect unity with ourselves and with each other and with Yahweh. Then the gifts of Spirit Holy will be poured out. So you got to turn away from this and be in unity. And also, again, in the 4th book, in verse 10, pages 65 and 66, it says, today we have the same types of people who do not want to unify themselves with the house of Yahweh. Yahweh only works with the unified ones, as he plainly shows throughout the scriptures. Do you think I brought a bunch of sermons on unity? I tell you, unity is preached from Genesis through Revelation. The more I study it, the more I see unifying yourself with one another, with Yahweh, and with the work that he has established in these last days is the most important thing in your entire life. And verse 20 also says, the place in Acts where this occurred, this Spirit Holy was poured out, was merely a picture of what you will see here in these last days, in this last generation, in the house of Yahweh. When Spirit Holy is poured out again, and the scriptures describe that unified bunch, that group of people who Yahweh worked with. He described them so you would know them. And one thing, you cannot be separated and receive these blessings. Neither will you receive the gifts of Spirit Holy as long as you're not in unity with the house of Yahweh. And you know there's an answer. There's an answer, and it's called the peaceful solution. And it really does work. It'll bring you into unity. The honesty, respect, truthfulness, and compassion. If you practice these basic things, you'll have a smile on your face. You'll be sharing that smile with other people. They won't be grumbling at you, and you won't be grumbling at them. If you're truly joyous, it's really hard to grumble about how things are, how bad you think things are, because you've let some influence, you've let something bewitch you and get hold of you and think you'd be better off out in the world. If you can't say something great about someone or the situation, don't say anything. Smile. It works. It's contagious. And Prepare yourself in advance. We're going through lessons right now. We just went through curveballs and pitfalls. Prepare yourself in advance to handle these curveballs and pitfalls. And in closing, I just want to share a few scriptures with you. If you'll turn to page 972. Page 972. And remember that we've got to overcome these words that come out of our mouth, because we're being judged by them. So we've got to overcome this. We've got to work on it. We have all the tools. We have the peaceful solution. We have the greatest teacher in the world right here, giving us this information, giving us the words of life. All right, if you look at chapter 2, verse 7, it says towards the bottom, "To him who overcomes, I will give to eat from the tree of life, which is in the midst of the garden of Yahweh." And if you look on down in verse 11, it says, "He who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death." Look over in verse 17, it says, "To him who overcomes, I will give to eat of the hidden manna, and will give him a white stone, a sentence of acquittal, and in the stone a restored name, Yahweh, written, which no one acknowledges except he who understands." And in verse 26 on the next page, "And he who overcomes and keeps my works until the end, to him I'll give power over the nations." In verse 5 in chapter 3, "He who overcomes, the same will be clothed in white raiment, and I will not blot out his name from the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his Malachim." What a joyous thing. And look at verse 12. "He who overcomes, I will make a pillar in the house of my Father, and he will never go out of it, and I will write upon him the name of my Father and the name of the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my Father newly named." And then in verse 21, "To him who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne." So, brethren, I encourage you, please, to overcome the words of our mouth, the disrespect that comes forth from the heart sometimes when we're a little disgruntled about something. We murmur a little bit, and under the breath and all those things. But remember, we're being judged by those things, and those things will keep you out of the kingdom of Yahweh, okay? So let's all work together. Let's keep the peaceful solution, and let's overcome. And with that, if you all please stand. I'd like to present to you, it's my great honor and privilege to present to you a great priest in the house of Yahweh, the great Kohan Eliah Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may all be seated. Of course, continuing, showing how Yahshua said in Matthew 24 that the love of this world would grow cold. There's nothing there to show love, to help create this love, to teach this love. Well, the EU now, who has been welcoming in refugees, they're now wanting to start trading back what they called non-qualified refugees to Africa for qualified refugees. So they're basically telling them that we find no purpose in these people, but if you'll send us someone qualified to do a job, then we'll take them and we'll pay you to do that. So once again, keep in mind, you can train somebody to do anything you want to if you're willing to do so. And then Israel and Palestine. Remember, Yahshua he gave us two instructions that would bring world peace if we would follow them. One was to love Yahweh with all of our heart, soul, and might, and the second was to love our brother as ourself, or love our neighbor as ourself. And in doing so, that would encompass all of the rules, all of the laws of peace. Well, Israel, of course, there is no love for Yahweh there. They changed the name, from House of Yahweh and then moved. But now they also have it. They took a poll here recently, and 53% of Israelis agree that all Palestinians should be shot on sight when committing a crime. Don't arrest them. Don't try them. Just shoot them on sight. And 80% agree that the houses of their family should be demolished. So keep that in mind, because that is the lack of love. And then also continuing along with the riots that we see, this lack of being able to make decisions. In Kashmir, they're having riots over the death of a protester. Turkey now, they're calling out saying that they want a safe zone for Syrian refugees. And then there's one word you need to notice through all of these things, and when you're watching the news, when you're reading the news, watch when they call out for, they're looking for support from their allies. Remember, Turkey is part of NATO. It's a group of allies. And you're going to notice that word allies come up a lot in the news. But Turkey is calling for support from their allies to create the safe zone. And then, of course, Veterans Day was this last week, and there was a special they ran on Veterans Day, and it was to show how veterans truly suffer. And there's statistics they show that veterans are 50% more likely to commit suicide. 22 veterans a day commit suicide. That's a day commit suicide. Suicide kills veterans more than cancer, heart disease, homicide, and transportation accidents. And to show you how deadly it is, there's more veterans committed suicide than died in the Afghan-Iraqi war. So that's a huge problem. There's no peace in war. There's no love in war. And I would take it back to what the deacon just said before. There's a lot more going on than just murder. There's a lot of perversion taking place in the military. And that's leading to this confusion of the mind. And then it goes on to a man in California who recently, he was a strong headache, vomiting, felt really bad, rushed to the hospital just in time. They could save his life. And they pulled out a tapeworm from his brain. Now, did they tell him to cleanse himself? Did they tell him it's more likely you had eggs in your body and you probably got a lot more? Will that come from? Well, no. They sent him home. He'll be a repetitive customer. But keep in mind that it's very important that we cleanse ourselves from these things because we don't want those things. And if we've been in this world, odds are we may have those things. 85% have them that don't know they do. And then Callahan County Jail, that's the Callahan County, that's where we're at. Of course, it's overcrowded. They set a budget for $150,000 to house prisoners. Well, they've already exceeded that. Right now they're at $582,123 of housing these prisoners. So they're $432,000 over budget. Now, the problem is it's the lack of what's being taught in the community to help put an end to this, to help stop the crime. That would go a long way in saving $500,000 right off the bat. If they would just teach, or allowed to be taught, character education. That would go a long way. Also, student loans are becoming so high, student loan debt has now surpassed credit card debt at $1.3 trillion. They're saying you work your whole life just to pay back your tuition. So going to college, just hope you live long enough to pay off your debt. That's your goal. And then hidden apps. You heard Pastor speak about applications last week, how it's an agreement. Well, there's now a huge problem. One man says it's in every school where students are using perversion. The news will explain it enough. Perversion, they're actually hiding things, child pornography, we'll put it at that, in the schools, and they're sharing it, and they're now starting to arrest students for these things. But these things are being used for perversion. There's not one positive thing that anyone said about these hidden apps that are being used for something positive, and it even goes in to show what some of these are. So parents, I would check some phones if you have children with phones. I would check them just to make sure, and make sure they're educated on why these things are dangerous. They're going the way of Cain. Also, moving along after that, France attacked yesterday. It was in the news a lot. There were multiple attacks, multiple locations. I should say multiple locations. They're saying the attacks occurred around the same time. Over 120 killed, multiple injured. Now, they called for a state of emergency. Now, what that means in our terms, that's the same as martial law. They shut down the borders, they issued a curfew, and the military took control. That's what's going on in France right now. Pay close attention because President Hollande, he calls it an act of war. France is also a member of NATO. Anytime a member of NATO is attacked and it's declared an act of war, that calls in for everyone that's part of NATO, who Turkey's already calling for. That calls in for them to come attack the aggressor, and they are labeling the aggressor as ISIS in Syria. And that's what they're labeling it as, and that's where they want to go. And of course, in Syria, you have Russia and Syria there waiting. So we're really looking at a bombshell that can explode any moment, and you can have all-out nuclear war. Now, going on to Professor John Schillenhuber, you probably remember that man. He was the one that called for depopulation of mankind down from 6 billion to 2 billion. Well, we put back in a clip that we've showed before, but it's important to pay attention because that climate control convention is going to be held in Paris, just where these attacks took place. It's due to start November the 30th through December the 11th. Listen to what he says, because he says in 2009 we brought this, but people wasn't ready yet. We didn't have we didn't have the people behind us. They were not ready. But now he says he thinks he has the people behind him. He has the push of the Pope behind him. Pope Francis, in 2009, that is where he called for depopulation of the earth. And that's what we're looking at to be reinstated again. Now, I want to read this to you real quick. It was when he brought these things out at the encyclical by Pope Francis. It says, the Holy See Press Office made the announcement today that besides being one of the 4 official presenters at the Pope's controversial encyclical on the environment Thursday in Vatican City, John Schillenhuber is also to join 80 other scientists who are official advisors to the Vatican on scientific matters. 80 advisors to the Vatican, and he is one of them. And of course, he feels he has the push of the church behind him to accomplish his goals. Then we move on to Ashton Carter. Remember, Ashton Carter is the Secretary of Defense for the United States of America, and he is saying that the United States doesn't want a hot war or a cold war, but Russia and China are stepping out of the international order. They need to get back in line. And then last but not least, Saudi Arabia has just drafted a resolution. They've sent it to the UN calling for... Now remember, Saudi Arabia is presently bombing Yemen. They're killing lots of people, but they're calling for the UN to step in and tell Russia and Syria they need to stop the violence. And of course, Iran is saying that it's very ironic for Saudi Arabia to say such a thing. At this time, if we could go ahead and play the news.
Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrayl Hawkins. Well, in the news this week, hidden phone apps, overcrowded jails, Israeli-Palestinian violence, war-torn Syria, and the latest updates on the Paris attacks that have shaken Europe. But first, refugees go home. EU leaders are seeking desperate measures to stop refugees from entering European countries. Holding a summit in Malta this past week, they met with their African counterparts to strike a deal that would basically remove a load of African asylum seekers off their hands. But some are calling this grand bargaining.
Interesting. As part of the deal, the African governments are to crack down on their borders and speed up measures to take back hundreds of thousands of illegal migrants deported from Europe. In exchange for acting as Europe's border guards, the governments are to receive funding from the EU countries estimated at about 3.6 billion euros. Now, there is also the promise of offering visas for well-qualified Africans.
Critics of the agreements are concerned for the lives of the migrants. Ivernor McGowan, director of the EU Department of Amnesty International, told the AFP news agency the EU is seeking to transfer its migration problem. This can lead to an outsourcing of human rights violations and is quite worrying.
Well, continuing our coverage on the increasing violence between Israelis and Palestinians, there have been more deaths in the past few days. 2 Palestinians have been killed and several others injured by Israeli forces in the occupied territories of East Jerusalem after allegedly trying to stab one Israeli police officer.
Another Palestinian was shot dead outside the Damascus gate, and Israeli troops gunned down a 22-year-old woman at a checkpoint in the West Bank. Now, both killings were the result of more suspected stabbing attacks. Protesters in a refugee camp have also been injured in clashes with Israeli forces. Now, since the violence erupted at the beginning of October, at least 84 Palestinians have been killed and more than 2,700 injured.
Yeah, that's an amazing number. Some say the stabbing incidents may be a setup. Paul Lawardy, co-founder of the Free Palestinian or Palestine movement, told RT half of these stabbing incidents are very suspect. It's uncertain whether there's any attempted stabbing that took place because it's very easy to place a knife at the scene where a Palestinian man or woman has been executed. And there are witnesses who say there was no knife.
No knife. As we see these latest deaths, a new poll shows 53% of the Israelis support the killing of Palestinian assailants on the spot. 53%. Shoot them on the spot.
No questions asked.
No questions asked. Now, the report also found that 80% of respondents believe the family home of the Palestinians engaged in anti-Israeli attacks must be demolished.
What about the families of those assailants?
I guess they're not concerned with the family. It's demolish the house.
Wow, amazing.
Well, some analysts say the Palestinian acts are justifiable considering the brutal occupation they are struggling with.
Definitely a tit-for-tat situation
Absolutely.
in that area. Well, meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has arrived in Washington to meet with U.S. President Barack Obama. Many believe, despite rising violence in the occupied territories, Netanyahu plans to focus on military aid from the U.S.
Now, video has surfaced online showing an Israeli police officer assaulting Palestinian journalists while covering the clashes in the West Bank. Fatih Arori, the journalist who shot the video, works for the Xinhua news agency. He says the Israeli officer was deliberately chasing down journalists.
In an interview with RT, he explained the attack. We were covering the event taking place in the northern city of Al-Baret, when suddenly the Israeli army arrested one man who had already been hit by an Israeli jeep. Journalists rushed to get footage of the incident, but an officer from the border guards unit began using pepper spray on the cameramen and the paramedics, beating and pushing some of them.
I felt my life was under threat, he continued. Some journalists were left unconscious, while others were transferred for treatment to the hospital. What was most bizarre, one of the officers tried to remove our gas masks, which we were wearing to protect us from being pepper sprayed directly in our faces. Well, when the Israeli police were contacted for a response, they had no comment, but this is not the first time they have been accused of attacking members of the press.
Well, Israel is not the only land with unrest. In Kashmir, near the city of Jamar Masjid, police fired tear gas to calm protesters who took to the streets after Friday prayers. Clashes erupted when groups of youths gathered on the main road outside the city and threw stones at security personnel. They are angry about the killing of an engineering student during a protest the previous week.
Well, turning now to war-torn Syria and Turkey's renewed calls for a safe zone for refugees there. The Syrian army has fought its way to an airbase near Aleppo that's been under attack from ISIL militants for nearly 2 years. Now, hundreds of Syrian soldiers were reportedly freed in what is being called one of the biggest victories for Syria's army since the Russians began airstrikes against ISIL in order to aid the Syrian government.
But not everyone supports President Bashar al-Assad's government. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was expected to use his presidency at the G20 summit to try and persuade allies, which would include the United States, of course, against giving Syrian Kurdish rebels a greater role in the conflict.
According to Euronews, the Turkish president gave what he called a friendly warning, although he didn't specify to who, but said, if you do not take a principled stand against terrorism, at the end, this fire will fly back in your face. Those countries who think they're living in confidence and prosperity should not forget that you never know what can happen tomorrow.
Wow. Well, the United States recently celebrated another Veterans Day, but despite celebrations, some veterans still feel alone the rest of the year. Current statistics from the Department of Veterans Affairs and analysts show more U.S. veterans killed themselves than died in Iraq and Afghanistan.
At an alarming rate, 22 veterans a day now take their own lives. Suicide rates among veterans is 50% higher than civilians and outrank cancer, heart disease, homicide, and transportation accidents as the leading cause of death. Now, PTSD, or the post-traumatic stress disorder, is one of the leading causes. And, you know, Katan, one of the soldiers commented in this report that the nightmares and the flashbacks and the things that they see, most people will never see here in the United States. And they reported how they can't get the thoughts out of their mind. They're there and they never leave. And that's one of the things that adds to that stress, and, you know, eventually they just can't take it.
Yeah, you can leave from the places of war, but you can't leave from the images in your mind. Yeah, that's got to be difficult. Well, Luis Ortiz from Napa, California got the scare of his life when what started out as a splitting headache quickly wound him up in the emergency room, where doctors discovered he had a worm in his brain. Ooh. A worm in his brain, that's right. Doctors used a tool with the camera to perform emergency brain surgery. That's when they discovered the larva of a parasitic tapeworm had formed in a cyst, and it was choking off the circulation of fluids inside Luis's brain.
Luis is recovering but still can't believe his experience. In a CBS News interview, Luis said, yeah, the doctor pulled it out and he said that it was still wiggling. And I'm like, ew, that doesn't sound too good. Like, what are the odds that I'd get a parasite in my head? Well, doctors told Luis that the worm more than likely came from pork or from swimming in a river.
Interesting. Well, one county in Texas is also having problems with cells of a different sort. Larry McGee is looking at that story for us, as well as more information concerning the debt trap of schools and the illicit uses of hidden apps among today's youth. Well, Larry, what do you have for us on these latest stories?
Callahan County Sheriff Terry Joy says his life apprehending, detaining, and monitoring criminals is a full-time, 24-hour-a-day job. Personnel for the sheriff seems not to be a problem, but being able to appropriately house the county's many offenders is. The Callahan jail is only capable of housing 9 residents, but its current inmate population is at 42. The overflow, which the county can't handle, is having to be outsourced to surrounding counties at taxpayers' expense. Sheriff Joy says that the cost of $35 to $45 per day to house an inmate is a burden to citizens, but nevertheless, the taxpayers want enforcement in Callahan County, and they have it. The total cost for housing offenders this year for the county has been $582,000, significantly more than the $150,000 it had budgeted for 2015 to 16. In the end, the sheriff says he doesn't want criminals to get the impression that they can commit a crime in Callahan County and not go to jail, so they will continue to find the money to incarcerate offenders no matter what the price tag. The sheriff believes a lot of the crime in his county is a spillover from the Abelin area. The town of Abelin, of course, is known famously for its 3 major colleges, and this week, debt is again making big headlines, having spiraled out of control to a whopping $1.3 trillion, and that's more than all of the nation's credit card debt. Spotlighted in the media recently was Jess Sanchez, who is a 5th grade teacher with a master's in education and over $90,000 in student debt that it took him to get it. The 35-year-old educator was hoping to be able to use his salary from his new career to save towards his son's college tuition and also his own retirement. But as it stands, half of his $50,000 a year income has to be allocated towards repaying his student loans. At this point, the instructor says he has no budget for retirement and he is just trying to stay afloat in a generation where the retirement age is increasing to 75. The increase in technology is another sign of the times, and the dangers of its misuse is once again catching national attention. In Long Island, New York, sexting among school-aged children is producing everything from community shock to administrative discipline. 2 15-year-olds from the school recounted being suspended from an institute for opening a sex video which was sent to them in a group message. Altogether, 20 students were suspended for up to 5 days for either receiving the video or resending it to other people. In addition, 2 of the school's pupils were arrested and given felony charges for child pornography as well. In other locations throughout the country, there are similar shames. At Canyon City High, in a small town in Colorado, police officials confiscated a student phone with several hundred explicit images, reportedly being traded back and forth like baseball cards. Hundreds of students are said to have been involved in that indignity, concealing their illicit possessions in plain sight in what are being called hidden phone apps. The applications are made to look like innocent tools such as a calculator, but when a specific code is entered, the app reveals secret content. Most children are said to be aware of the applications, but most parents are not. A representative for Common Sense Media, James Stayer, says this is a wake-up call for parents and teachers around the country because children know more about these apps than we do. Some sexting cases are reported to involve children as young as 11 years old, prompting one computer expert and senior editor at CNET stating that with modern technology, there is no way to guarantee your child's safety. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Katan, that's very sad. These phones that we use on a daily basis, they're great tools, but they can definitely be a serious trap and distraction for today's youth.
That's right.
Well, we now turn our attention over to Paris, France, where there have been several terrorist attacks that have taken the city by surprise on a Friday night. A state of emergency has been declared in France, along with the closing of its borders and the level of emergency raised to red, the highest level. These actions declared by the French President, François Hollande. Residents are being asked to stay indoors, and others have willfully locked themselves inside for fear of another attack.
There is currently a manhunt underway in France, as many of the attackers have reportedly escaped, of course with the exception of 2 suicide bombers. There is also a current hostage situation with reports of those hostages being executed one by one. Of course, as things unfold, we get clearer information. Currently, authorities do not know who's behind these latest attacks that's being called the worst in the last few decades.
Even though no one has confirmed for certain who's responsible for the attacks, ISIS is claiming responsibility, and the United States is, of course, putting the blame on the terrorist group, as well as the Western media has been broadcasting that throughout the news. So at this point, some are saying it's going to be very hard to stop this juggernaut from a public relations point of view, even though authorities would like to see a proper investigation to really know what has taken place, but that luxury, fearfully, doesn't look like it will be afforded.
Well, so in other words, Jeff, it looks like retaliatory actions will take place first, and if any type of investigation, that is, if they actually do an investigation into this, which I would suspect that they would, is done, that'll come later on. And of course, it seems like the U.S. and others are building this case toward ISIS in Syria. So that's eventually where this is going to end up.
That's right. Well, currently NATO administrators and officials are planning an emergency session between Brussels and Washington, D.C. Additionally, the language in the French state of emergency is such that they can claim that the head of the state has been targeted as he was at a nearby football stadium observing a game in session. So he was very close to those attacks.
That's right, close enough to hear the blast. With the borders closed and soldiers on the streets, this definitely qualifies for a state of emergency. So, if the French cabinet convenes and approves the state of emergency, they'll have 12 days for it to go into effect. But based on the NATO treaty, one could argue that if this was a state of war, as declared by the president, by default, other NATO countries could actually come together and act as a coalition, which would, of course, bring any action, military or otherwise, right to Syria's doorstep.
That's getting all the allies together, in other words.
Yep, NATO allies.
According to a geopolitical analyst, Patrick Heiningsson, eyes are on France and other NATO nations to see what's going to take place over the next 72 hours. And he concluded, things are coming to a boil. And I think we know where this is heading, and it's not going to be pleasant.
That's right. So, you may be wondering what France's president has to say about these tragic events, his response, in other words, to terrorism. We'll pay close attention as we play this video of his speech following the attacks in Paris, a video courtesy of The Guardian News.
Ce qui s'est produit hier à Paris et à Saint-Denis, près du Stade de France, c'est un acte de guerre. Et face à la guerre, le pays doit prendre les décisions appropriées. C'est un acte de guerre qui a été commis par une armée terroriste, Daesh, une armée djihadiste contre la France, contre les valeurs que nous défendons partout dans le monde, contre ce que nous sommes, un pays libre qui parle à l'ensemble de la planète. La France sera impitoyable à l'égard des barbares de Daesh. Elle agira avec tous les moyens, dans le cadre du droit, et tous les moyens qui conviennent, et sur tous les terrains, intérieurs comme extérieurs, en concertation avec nos alliés qui eux-mêmes sont visés par cette menace terroriste. Dans cette période si douloureuse, si grave, si décisive pour notre pays, j'en appelle à l'unité, au rassemblement, au sang-froid. Vive la République et vive la France.
Well, with those words, Katan, you may be thinking that we might be headed for an all-out war. Well, you wouldn't be wrong. War takes the lives and causes, of course, the number of the population to drop. But be that big or small, well, that appears to fall right in line with the plans of a man named John Schulenhuber, who says we need to depopulate the world. Now take a look at this next video.
2015 clearly is a crucial year, but this is the year where we make or break a climate agreement. I think we are much more aware of the obstacles, the contradictions, the vested interests involved in order to come up with a climate agreement. But I think we have a really good chance this year to come up with something which puts us on a pathway towards climate stabilization in Paris at the end of the year. And the reason for that is that it is not just a few climate scientists and just a few enlightened government officials, but it is all walks of society, if you like. All quarters of humanity are joining into a choir asking for climate action. And now the Vatican, that means Pope Francis, speaking for 1.2 billion Catholic people on this planet, has weighed in. And he has not weighed in just in saying, well, there may be a problem and some scientists are very concerned, so we should use the precautionary principle. But he said, we are in the midst of an extremely big crisis, threatening the livelihoods of billions of people on this planet. Oh, even worse, we are about to destroy creation. And if we destroy creation, this creation may destroy us, or actually will destroy us.
Well, interesting plans of some. Well, the U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter has accused Russia of posing a threat to international world order, saying Washington would do anything to defend its allies against Moscow. At the Reagan National Defense Forum in California, he stated, "We do not wish to make a warm or a cold war with Russia, but make no mistake, the United States will defend our interests and our allies, the principal international order, and the positive future it affords us all."
Mr. Carter also accused Moscow's actions in Ukraine as dangerous and that Russia was bullying the countries in the Eastern Europe. Lastly, he also criticized Russia's involvement in Syria, saying that the country's military actions in the region will prolong the war in the crisis-sick country, as well as separately criticizing China its military budget and its land reclamation in the South China Sea, he said, is disrupting free navigation in the disputed territory.
It's those islands that they're dredging up and making
man-made
islands. Them
That's right.
Chinese territory. Well, lastly, we close out our report with Saudi Arabia's push for a UN resolution against Iran and Russia over the ongoing war in Syria. The draft resolution has been presented to the UN's General Assembly's Rights Committee. The text condemns Syria for the use of force against Syrians and denounces Iran and Russia for intervening in Syria.
Many have described Riyadh's move as ironic given the major rights violations by Saudi Arabia. The committee that the draft resolution was presented to focuses on human rights. The resolution was co-sponsored by Qatar and other Arab nations, as well as the U.S., Britain, France, and other Western states. It is expected to be put to vote early next week.
The resolution also calls for the Syrian opposition to stop attacks as it benefits ISIL and other terrorist groups. A Syrian delegate reacted angrily to the resolution, saying Saudi Arabia and Qatar had no right to lecture anyone on human rights. Again, analysts say it is very ironic, again, for Saudi Arabia to even push for such a resolution, since that kingdom there is known for major violation of human rights. No. Well, parasites attacking the brain. Are children influenced to devalue themselves through sexual activities that bring, of course, STDs into the body? That also affects the mind. These activities bring confusion and the inability to make peaceful decisions. The minds of our world leaders are hell-bent on war and are determined to make their mark on society no matter how many lives are lost in the process. Well, history has shown us hatred, war, and retaliation only breeds more, you guessed it, hatred, war, and retaliation. Foods and activities that mankind were never meant to partake of is just a part of what's bringing the strength of our society down. Mankind's problems are increasing, but there's a small group of growing people whose problems are decreasing. Sounds too great to be true? Well, it is true. Find out how, through the teachings of Yisrayl Hawkins and the House of Yahweh, people are improving their lives permanently. Here's what you can do. And don't forget the latest and greatest Bible study tool available today, the Yisrael Says program. You can go to www.yisraelsays.com for all your scriptural questions. And here's more information.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also check out our new website, www.ypnnews.com, and to email the House of Yahweh, send your emails to info@yahweh.com. And for any calls coming outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. And once again, don't forget www.yisraelsays.com for that great Bible study tool.
Excellent resource, sounds like. Well, don't go anywhere. Grab your pencils, your paper, and Holy Scriptures, because up next is the man anointed to bring forth peace, Yisrayl Hawkins. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.
If everyone would please stand at this time, I'd like to introduce the greatest teacher in the world, the great Kahan Yisrael, Abel Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. Hey, you're looking great. Come on. That's why you hear them yell. Praise Yahweh. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. After seeing that news, you've got to be the most joyous people on the face of the earth, right? Wow. We're sitting here with a bird's eye view, and Yahweh said, you will see it. And of course, we are seeing it. I should show you what we're doing first here, I guess. That got big attention right there. We released 2 this week. Yisrayl Hawkins makes formal plea to all world leaders to in effort to push world peace in new post this week. I see that really took off with a bang, 60,000 in just a few hours, and a potential of 201 million. Right. Yisrayl Hawkins proclaims the House of Yahweh is fulfilling biblical prophecy and offers proof. That is over 132,000 now. And open letter to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that's the one you're looking at here, is over 113,000. And we turned out another one this week that I was so amazed by it. A plea to all world leaders. Yisrayl Hawkins makes plea to all world leaders in effort to push world peace in new post this week. 10,941,421. Big ones, big stations too. Really great what Yahweh is doing to show this to not only His house, but the world leaders, and you can tell from what some of the world leaders say that they're up on what we're speaking here. I got a map here for you that now this one shows France, which is right here. If you can, let me see if I can get that a little bit closer. I don't want to get it too close. I want you to see the river Euphrates. It's right here going up through Iraq. So this is the 4th part of the earth now. That put down your phones and look at this. Everybody really pay attention to this. Put down every phone. Don't turn the thing off if you have to. But pay attention to what I'm saying. You really need this right here. Them phones, they'll bug you. They bug everybody around you. In fact, if you see someone using them, nudge him and say, hey, Israel is trying to get your attention. Turn the thing off. And surely you can do without it till I get through speaking, right? Praise Yahweh. France, right there. Here's the great river Euphrates. That 4th part of the earth is exactly what Revelations 9 shows you there, and we'll read that in just a moment. And this, of course, is where Yahweh shows the great number of people are going to be slaughtered there, and that is exactly what's taking place. One of the things that's shown is the oil that they're fighting over. Each one of those little square boxes, if you can see them, I got some of them circled, the states, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Egypt, all of these in that 4th part of the earth. But every one of these little square boxes here that you see them everywhere. They're dotted all over this. It's an oil program that's taking place that they're trying to protect there. Hurt not the oil and the wine. Well, these oil programs, of course, are being pulled away by Russia and China. That is, they're in attempt to stop using the petrodollar. That's the United States. That's what keeps the United States strong and healthy, and the greatest builder of weapons on earth. If it wasn't, if the United States hadn't been planned like Yahweh planned it to begin with, and at a distance is safety. That's what I told you about the earth itself. If Satan and the beings out there, some of them who are the gods that's leading these world leaders into war and retaliation. That's what you see right here in this thing with France and the the Vatican saying this needs direct global action, and of course they mean killing, retaliation, vengeance, and that's what they've been teaching all along since the days of Cain, and that's what we're seeing here right now, and the world is falling. It's not getting any better. If this could have made it better, Cain would have been living high on the hog, right? That's oaky talk, but that's that's the way it is. It's not going to get better. It's going to keep getting worse, as Yahweh says, till 1/3 of the people are dead over that fourth part of the earth right there, and it gives you the exact. How would Yahweh know that? How would a prophet, Yochanan, who recorded this, how would he know that? Wake up, wake up. Yahweh is talking to you. He's actually showing that to you. He's revealing these secrets, that they're secret plans. Yahweh is to you right now to show you what is exactly what sin brings. That's one thing. I'm sorry to say that some telephones are bringing it, and I'm going to just pronounce a curse on them if you don't start governing these things properly. You're already cursed with it. Some of you are already cursed with them. When you get to where you can't lay something down, like a bottle of wine or a telephone, you need to stomp that thing. Get rid of it. It's, when it takes the place of your learning, just seeing what Yahweh has here for you. You can't study it too much. Someone said he brought a sermon about being bored. I don't see how anyone could be bored in the house of Yahweh. We have a garden, the Garden of Eden, Yahweh put here. Remember that? Chapter 2 of Genesis? He planted a garden for voluptuous living, and we got it right here. If you're bored, go to the office. We have every kind of class you could think of going on here. If we don't, we'll create it. The women, that teach cooking. I was so amazed. The Filipino dinner. Does anyone remember that last week, or did your telephone keep you from enjoying it? If you'd put them things away and concentrate on that bite of food, you would see how joyous life can be. That Filipino dinner I'm talking about last week. You know how long it took me to teach them to make that meal? It don't take long. I can teach you in just a little bit. And you'll be some great cooks like they are on Filipino food. Or Spanish or Tex-Mexican or whatever. We got it right here. Right here. Not only that, we can take you, you can become food smart, You can plant seed. We'll teach you how to plant seed, both men and women. Teach you how to plant seed, raise your food, and taste it. Some people have to be taught to enjoy anything, because they got distractions that Satan puts out there. That's your problem. Don't let her distract you. Pay attention to what Yahweh has offered you here and what He's showing you right now, what the world is going to be, what the world can be in the future, and how Satan is trying to wreck it right now, and you want to be a part of it with a stupid telephone to take its place? You got to be the biggest nut on the face of the earth. Oh, boy. Anyway, that's enough of that. I hope. Remember Daniel. Daniel 12:4. Knowledge increased. Now, Yahweh knew this. He showed it to you big time. He didn't show it to anyone else. We're the first ones to bring this out. Knowledge will be increased, he said, in that time period. And then Daniel explained in that time period, this is going to be the greatest trouble on the face of the earth. The greatest time of trouble, he said. Now, surely you could put those two together. The greatest time of trouble, that knowledge will be increased, that Yeshua showed would actually invent the nuclear bomb that could darken the sun. There's no way you can top that right there. There's no way you can get around seeing it unless your mind is so clogged with sin that you can't even hear words coming through your ears. There's no way you can deny it. The world is going to have an increase in knowledge. It's going to bring forth the greatest time of trouble ever. That's in Daniel 12. Yeshua said in Matthew 24, it's going to bring forth bombs that can darken the sun. At a time when there wasn't even a firecracker. Isaiah talked about the great hail that's going to wipe out the human race because of sin. Hail. Of course, that word don't mean hail. It means hail, okay, but it also means rifle fire. Did you know that? It means bombs going off. It means destruction. And that's what we're seeing the first taste of here in that fourth part of the earth, and it's really getting worse. And you notice they're threatening each other now with the nuclear wars. The Catholic Church is saying, you know, this is insane. I've told the Pope he's insane for years. I've been telling the Vatican that for years, and now they're waking up and say, oh, yeah, this is insane. I'm glad you're admitting it. Well, here's Italy, and connects you a little closer to France there, where you can see the two, Italy and France. The wars that, if you'll turn over to Revelations and keep in mind, Revelations 9, keep in mind the increase in knowledge that brings this about. Now, when the knowledge was increased, it would have taken sailboats how long to get from the United States, what is the United States now, and across the ocean? How long would it take them? Well, Columbus has a number of days. It's humongous. They even got lost at sea back in the time this was written. Yeah, 1492. When before that, now the prophets was talking about this Babylonian land that wasn't established yet, and he said that's where the house of Yahweh is going to be. Nobody understood it. They didn't know. Daniel didn't understand his prophecy. We're the only ones now because Yahweh said we would. We would understand this. And he opened it and Daniel says, look, here's two people that I can ask what the end is going to be. And he told you that right there in that same chapter. He said, I looked and I saw two others and I asked the one in linen. And he answered. The one in linen answered Daniel in a vision. How can you top that? Are you so stupid you can't even see that? I'm talking to the world, of course. I'm not talking to you. Well, here in Revelations, we see what Daniel was speaking of. Revelations 9, if you go back to chapter 7, you'll see where these are held back by the two witnesses. By one of the two witnesses, he asked that they be held back until numbers was found. And of course, we're finding those numbers now. Where people are calling in, like, you know where Denmark is? How many knows where Denmark is? Oh, great. Praise Yahweh. We got an order from one man for 5 books of Yahweh. And that's just a drop in the bucket to what we're getting and what we're going to get. But we see that we are reaching these people. And when I started mentioning the book of Yahweh in the articles, before that we were getting very few orders, and now the orders are increasing big time. Well, this fourth part of the earth now, that is where the great time of trouble is, was not shown by Daniel, but it's shown here in Revelations. And he named it. He named it. Showed you actually where it's going to be. Around the great river Euphrates, in that fourth part of the earth. In and around the great river Euphrates. How could you be any more precise than that fourth part of the earth in and around the great river Euphrates? Why isn't it occurring here, happening here in America right now? Because Yahweh has protection for his house, and if he didn't protect this setup that he has here, the computer systems that reach all over the world, if he didn't protect it, how would you reach out with this? We would be as helpless as the disciples were back before any of this was invented. And this went on until knowledge was increased. It had to be increased for Yahweh's work to be done. There's no way that the world could be reached by a person standing on a soapbox somewhere, standing out in the street hollering. You're not going to reach very many people. So Yahweh had to do this. You see what a magnificent thing you're looking at here? And you're included in that, every one of you. That should far surpass any joy that the world has to offer, the fake joys. The world has nothing but fake joys to offer. Things that hurt, that bite back, that kill. Like 60% of the people have one disease, 75% have another one, and another one, and another one. It's all over the world right now. That's the joy that they're suffering. And believe me, they're suffering right now. You're very much honored, brethren, to be in a protected place, and Yahweh is going to protect it. Right now, he's protecting the whole United States because of his work. That's right. He's protecting the whole United States, and he says the United States is going to stay strong. And I brought you this years ago. It's in the Mark of the Beast. I wrote it back in the 70s, that the United States will remain strong until the very end. But it is going to be hit, and it's going to be hit hard. Not just the Twin Towers, but big time. And it even shows where they're going to get hit first. You need that book. You need to read it. You'd be a lot better off reading that than you would be playing with a telephone. In Daniel 12, Daniel saw the greatest time of trouble ever. He even saw people being resurrected. He saw your kinfolks being resurrected. Let me put it that way. Put it a little more personally. You know, Yahweh knew your kinfolks. He called you. He had to know them. He knew the whole bloodline. He knows a sparrow. When a sparrow falls to the ground, he knows it. Nothing gets by Yahweh. That's the kind of mind this being has. And he can tell you everything that's going to take place minute by minute by minute. How many hairs are on your head minute by minute by minute. He'd have to know that one fell off and laying on the table there in front of you. To know how many hairs you have on your head all the time. And he knows that with every one of us. Now, he inspired Daniel to see this. He actually opened Daniel's mind. Daniel didn't understand it, though. And he cried. He wept because this was hidden from him. I would, too, if it was taken from me. And I want to show it to everyone in the world, and I want you to be part of it. Praise Yahweh. Well, Daniel saw the greatest time of trouble ever. He saw us resurrecting the dead. You know, that was all put there so that you would understand that this is going to be in the time of the two witnesses. Daniel 12, the whole thing was written for the time of the two witnesses. And Daniel was shown the two witnesses. And he was allowed to speak to one, and that one could answer his questions, and then he had to close the book, and it had to be sealed until the time of the end. And Yahweh brought about all kinds of things to make sure that it was sealed till the time of the end. The temple was destroyed, the book of Yahweh taken to Rome. It was locked up. No one could look at it. No one could print it. No one could get it out to the people. No one could read it. And they went around arresting everyone they could find that had copies of it. Or even if they had a menorah, even if they didn't eat pork, which it says in Leviticus, don't eat pork. Leviticus 11, don't eat the pig, it's unclean, he said. If you didn't eat pig, they would arrest you, take all your property, take your children away from you, and kill you. That time is over. Yahweh is protecting his people. He's hovering over his house, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it this time. Otherwise, they would have already. They tried to stop this work. It can't be stopped. Yahweh said it will never be stopped again. We are the ones that Daniel saw that is going to resurrect the dead. Some of those dead are going to be resurrected to life and joy in the garden. You don't know what a joy it is to get out in the garden and raise food. It's a bigger joy. It's a bigger joy to raise people. And people that I can present to Yahweh as 100% pure in heart and 100% in unity with him. That's what you've got to be. Otherwise, you're going to be resurrected to shame and contempt. And that's what Daniel showed in Daniel 12. Some will be resurrected, but only to suffer shame, contempt, and of course the lake of fire. You can make your choice. You know, this is your choice. It's put before you from the beginning. But you better not let anyone stop you. You know, I've seen people raise a family. I've lived a long time, seemed like 1,000 years. I've seen people get married. They have children, and oh, how they love those children. Those children were so grand when they was changing their diapers. When they got big enough that wasn't taking place and they had a mind of their own, the parents wanted to forsake them. Yeah, I've seen it done. Seen them walk off, leave them. Just leave the house and leave the children. And they're found days later because someone called the police because they can't see any activity at the house. They couldn't stand life that they'd created inside that house. This is the world for you. Well, here in Revelations, we get a taste of what Satan's world is like and what she's going to make out of it, what she has the power to do. And Yahweh said, I'm not going to restrain, I'm not going to keep anything back from you. You're going to go the limit. I'm only going to save 1/5 of the earth's population alive. The prophet Isaiah said, few men left. It's going to be burned, and few men left. Burned. I remember when I was a very young boy, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6, but I remember that subject being one of the subjects in my house where we were gathered around a small table, and some of us standing and some sitting. But that subject was talked about when the Bible was being read by lamplight, no electricity at that time. All of that has come along in my lifetime. Knowledge was increased. That's the reason we have all of this right here. these wonderful things that Yahweh made possible for His house in these last days. And I'm speaking here. I'm being heard in Denmark. I'm being heard all over the world at this time. I say I mean we. All of us. We're being heard. Our voices are being heard all over the world. And it's being repeated by world leaders. Brother, we see it every day. People call me and say, did you hear what Putin said? Well, yeah, they're voicing what I say. Let's go back to Daniel before we read this in Revelations and make this much more clearer. In Daniel 12, and you need the New Translation. Now, that's one of the things you can look up on your telephone that'd make it worthwhile for you to own one of them things. Yeah, you can actually look up Israel Says on this, and you'll get the New Translation of this right here, the first few verses. At that time, I saw two witnesses. If you could read it like that, put it in front of everything you see there. At that time, I, Daniel, verse 5, I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there were two others. At that time, first 3-4 words in verse 1. At that time, and put it in front of every one of those things. And you'll see the answers that Daniel got but didn't understand, of course. And nobody can understand it today except you who have it explained to you by, at that time, Daniel shows you which one can answer your question even. You see that? I saw two, but I talked to one and he answered me. At that time, at this time of great trouble. Look at all the stuff you see in that. You could examine this chapter, and I bet you for a year, and you'd still be seeing new things that you didn't see when you first read it. At that time, will Michael stand up? Yes, that's a mistranslation. And then at that time, a time of trouble will be such as never was since there was a nation to the same time. Now, there can't be two times of trouble, and each one of them the greatest. So if you look at Matthew 24 and in verse 21, for then will be great tribulation, then. If you look back to verse 14, you'll see the two that Daniel saw, and a work going on there that is reaching the entire world, all nations. As I speak here, I'm heard in Denmark. I'm also heard on the boats now out in the ocean. The warships. Yes, they're hearing me too. They have capability of it. At that time, the greatest time of trouble ever, verse 21 and 22. And at that time, immediately, but after the tribulation, which means this is it, in this time period, when the message is being preached, verse 14, when the message is being preached, at that time, great tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened. At that time. You're in that time right now. Praise Yahweh, you're here. Back to Daniel. And at that time, verse 1, at that time, your people will be delivered. You remember Daniel was a righteous person. He really cared for the 12 tribes of Israel. And he prayed and he wondered and he moaned and he groaned because of what they were doing. And he saw how they were going bad. And of course, chapter 8, if you remember, I think I preached a few sermons on that chapter 8. In 9, Yahweh said, this is how it's going to be. And then he showed him some things in chapter 9 that was going to take place with this 12 tribes of Israel. And then this is the last part right here. But he showed how he is going to straighten this mess out. And it's all recorded right here in the book of Daniel. But it's recorded. Everything is supposed to come to the finish, come to Yahweh's righteousness at the time of those two witnesses that he sees here. In that generation, and Yeshua actually called it that generation in chapter 24. In verse 32 he says, "Now learn a parable of from the fig tree. When its branches become tender, put forth the leaves, you will know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, know that his coming is coming," and we've added some words there, end of the age and so forth, is near, at the very door. At that time, when the message is being preached, verse 14, you're going to know this right there. It's at the very door right now. Right now, they're calling for an all-out war against Russia and China. Now, this is a big step, and this is something that the other nations that we have attacked so far and taken over, Afghanistan, you remember when Georgia, Azerbaijan, Afghanistan, we were there. The Minister of Education in Georgia told us, we want this in all three of these countries. We want to fix it up. We'll fix it up and have a certain date where you can come here and teach the teachers in these three countries. All of them will hear this class, the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. If that had taken place at that time, the rest of this wouldn't be taking place. And Yahweh is allowing this plan of Satan, the plan of following Satan, the plan of the Vatican to be fulfilled. He's going to show them in no uncertain terms what sin brings. If you remember, he told Moshe, if you will diligently listen, diligently listen, that's the first part, to everything that the one sent, as Yeshua said, teaches. You can't go somewhere else to get it. It's got to be the one sent. Daniel shows you the one sent is going to be in this time period. Yeshua showed it too. Yeah, we're it. We're the ones sent, brethren. We're the ones that's making this heard in Denmark and every country on earth. Well, Matthew 24, the Savior shows that the one that Daniel saw, dressed in linen, is going to be taking this to all nations at the time that this greatest time of trouble ever is in progress. And we see it. I mean, we're seeing it right now. The news is full of it. You can't get away from it now. If you watch the news, you're going to see it. They shut down some of their main shows yesterday to show what took place in France. And they started out with 3 different bombings. They wound up with 7, I believe, 7 or 8 now this morning on this great killing that took place. And it was planned. It was all simultaneous, so it was planned and well executed. We don't know who did it. We don't know who trained these men, who paid them, who furnished their weapons. Was it Russia? Was it China? Was it the United States? Was it the Vatican? Was it NATO? Who was it? Well, we don't know. They had weapons from the United States, some from Russia, some from... What does that mean? Oh, I don't know. Scratching your head. We'll find out, baby. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Their days are numbered. Those are the big, bright words that I heard from the television yesterday. Their days are numbered. And the Pope says it's inhumane, it's insane. You're crazy. He is speaking to the Vatican. Well, anyway, here we are seeing it right now, exactly what Psalms 91 said. Psalms 91 said, you're going to see this. Now, how could you see it if you were one of the 12 disciples? Or Isaiah, or Daniel? How could you see it? He says you're going to see them fall at your right hand. That was it. That's Psalms 91. You, who is you? You. He says those who have Yahweh's shadow. Well, what in the world is Yahweh's shadow? Colossians? Colossians says the shadow of Yahweh is your protection over this protected place. Protection where? At the protected place, Yeremia. Yahweh says, I'm going to, 23, Yeremia 23. He says, I'm going to hover over you and take care of my house. And Yeshua said, the gates of hell will not prevail against it. You should believe that, brethren. You see the knowledge increase. You see everything here that I've mentioned. It was all prophesied for us and thousands of pieces more. It's a wonderful thing to be in the house of Yahweh. It's a most wonderful thing on earth. But you can't get enough of it. You can't get too much study. You can't get too much reading. If I had to go from here to town, if I had to, I would want to learn on the way. If I could, I'd have someone reading to me. I don't want to be without something to read for 1 minute. That's when I would get bored. You know, that's the only thing that would bore me is when I couldn't when I had to stop learning. That would be boring. You need to put in as much time and study as you possibly can. Don't let it interfere with your work, of course. Do that with all your might, as Yahweh has said, and you will find joy in it. He said, if you'll do this, you'll find joy. That's what he tells you in the 12th chapter of Deuteronomy. If you'll just read that carefully, you'll see that he's teaching you how to have joy, real, true joy, without hurting someone around you, without hurting yourself, without catching an STD that'll knock your eyes out. Do you know syphilis is on the rise? 60%, 67% now have syphilis in the world. Syphilis makes you go blind. Makes your brain go blind too. It attacks your brain. You're so dumb you can't even understand what I'm saying. That's syphilis. That's what it'll do for you. Almost as bad as marijuana. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the next leader. I love you!